An 89-year-old frail man entered a cafe, requesting a simple sandwich. He was met with disdain and humiliation. Among the customers, a wealthy woman watched intently, her eyes drawn to something on his wrist. Suddenly, she froze, her heart racing. As she approached him, her face paled at what she discovered. But before staring this beautiful story, tell us in the comment box where you are watching this beautiful story. The gentle aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the low buzz of conversation in the busy cafe. It was an ordinary day, but a strange silence enveloped the room when the door opened, revealing the elderly man. His steps were slow and heavy as he crossed the threshold. Jep, visibly worn by life at 89, carried not only the burden of age, but also years of hardship. His tattered, faded clothes offered little protection against the biting cold, and his nearly soulless shoes barely concealed his toes. With trembling hands, he made his way through the cafe, ignoring the disapproving stares and hushed murmurs that felt like direct judgments. The gnawing pain in his empty stomach propelled him forward, each step a battle between dignity and necessity. He kept his gaze low, fearing the evident disdain in the air. He knew he was unwelcome, but had no other choice. As he arrived at the counter, he placed his few coins on the surface. Marcela, the middle-aged owner known for her cold demeanor, looked him up and down with a disgusted expression. Her once white apron was stained with spilled coffee, but her gaze was even more tainted with prejudice. "I just wanted the cheapest sandwich, please," Jep said in a voice barely audible over the murmurs. His dirty fingers fumbled with the coins, attempting to project some semblance of confidence. Marcella crossed her arms, her expression stern. "This isn't a homeless shelter, old man," she said sharply, making Jep shudder. "If you don't have money, don't eat." Feeling the weight of humiliation, Jep took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "Please, anything you can give me. I'm hungry." His plea was almost a whisper, but desperation shone in his eyes. The atmosphere felt heavier around him, as some customers whispered to each other, clearly uncomfortable with his presence, yet no one offered help. "Do you think you can just walk in here and ask for free food?" Marcella sneered, leaning in close, her voice dripping with contempt. "We don't have leftovers. Go somewhere else." The murmurs turned into quiet laughter, and a nearby customer shook his head with a sarcastic smile. "That's right. Get out of here, old man. We don't want your company." With tears in his eyes, Jep froze, torn between leaving and pleading a little longer. His stomach growled, and shame consumed him. In that moment, he felt invisible, as if his entire life were being judged. The heavy silence in the cafe pressed down on him, amplifying his sense of isolation. He wished he could disappear, but his legs refused to move. Just when hope seemed to slip away, the cafe door swung open once more. An elegant, determined woman entered, capturing everyone's attention. Isabella, with her well-groomed brown hair and sharp suit, walked confidently through the room, her narrowed eyes assessing the situation unfolding before her. Without hesitation, Isabella approached the counter. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Marcela, who had moments ago displayed arrogance, now appeared uncertain as she recognized the arrival of this influential woman. Isabella was no ordinary customer. She was well known in the city for her luxury boutiques, and her presence commanded respect. "What's going on here?" Isabella asked, her voice firm yet laden with disapproval. Her gaze fell on Jep, who remained motionless, trying to maintain whatever dignity he had left. Marcela fumbled to regain her composure, but the entire cafe was now on edge, waiting for this unexpected intervention to unfold. The tension in the air was palpable. Isabella looked at Jep and offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, sir. Today, your lunch is on me." Jep blinked in disbelief, his tear-filled eyes now shining with a glimmer of hope. Turning her gaze to Marcela, who was still reeling from the interruption, Isabella stood her ground. The tension that had once existed between Jep and Marcela now focused entirely on Isabella, who exuded a quiet yet undeniable strength. "I already told you, this man cannot be served here," Marcela insisted defensively, trying to regain control. "This isn't a place for people like him." Isabella remained calm, though her eyes burned with intensity, making Marcella hesitate. People like him, she repeated, leaning slightly forward. We're talking about a human being, not an animal. The customers, who had previously enjoyed the spectacle of Jep's humiliation, now watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort as the scene shifted dramatically. Isabella, with her firm and determined stance, refused to back down. Jep, who had kept his head down, finally raised his eyes toward her, clutching the few coins he had managed to gather. He didn't know if he should speak, the words lodged in his throat, crushed by shame. I will pay for whatever he needs, Isabella said, turning her attention back to Jep. He has as much right to be here as anyone else. Her gaze swept over the faces around her, challenging anyone to contradict her. Marcella scoffed, trying to regain control. We don't offer charity here. If he can't pay, he shouldn't be here. That's just business. Business? Isabella interrupted, a slight ironic smile on her lips. Businesses are made of people, Marcella, and you seem to have forgotten that. She stepped closer to the counter, speaking for all to hear. I've been a customer here for years, and I never thought I would witness something so inhumane. A hush fell over the cafe as whispers faded into silence. Marcella, visibly flustered, knew Isabella's reputation was strong, and any confrontation could harm her image. Still, her arrogance held her firm. This isn't a charity center, she insisted, crossing her arms as if to strengthen her position. If he doesn't have money, I can't help him. Isabella let out a brief laugh, though her eyes remained piercing. You talk about charity, but you're treating a person as if they're less than that. Charity is a choice. Humanity shouldn't be. Jep, who had been silently observing, felt a whirlwind of emotions. It was rare for someone to stand up for him, especially with such fervor. The humiliation he had felt earlier began to dissolve into surprise. He never expected anyone, let alone a distinguished woman like Isabella, to defend him. Tears threatened to spill from his eyes. Noticing Jep's shaken expression, Isabella leaned in slightly, her voice softening. You can eat whatever you want today. She gently placed her hand over his, pushing the coins back toward him. Keep this. Don't worry about it, she said softly. Marcel felt his embarrassment grow with every moment that passed, eager to end the conversation. Well, if that's what you want, fine. But it won't happen again, he muttered, his pride still wounded. Isabella, undeterred, smiled lightly and replied, What won't happen again, Marcel? How you treat people here. I'll make sure everyone knows how your business operates. Marcel froze, realizing the weight of her words. The other customers discreetly shifted their attention, many reconsidering what they had just witnessed. Jep, finally regaining some composure, was led to a table by a staff member, still under Isabella's watchful gaze. She followed him with her eyes, feeling a mix of sadness and satisfaction. There was something about him that stirred a deep empathy within her, an unexplainable connection. As Jep settled into his chair, Isabella pulled out a seat for herself. Now, sir, what would you like to eat? You must be hungry, so let's take care of that. Her tone shifted from firm to warm and inviting. Jep, unsure how to express his gratitude, murmured, I don't know how to thank you for what you're doing for me. Isabella smiled, shaking her head. No need to thank me, Jep. Let's just start with a good lunch, and then we can talk. She watched intently as the waiter, still reluctant, brought Jep's plate, a sandwich, and a cup of coffee. Under Isabella's stern gaze, the waiter dared not say a word. Jep looked at the plate before him, surprise and gratitude mixing in his expression. His fingers trembled as he reached for the bread, hesitating as if he were afraid it might vanish. You can eat, Isabella encouraged, her gentle smile contrasting with her earlier firmness. It's yours. You deserve it. Grateful, Jep nodded and took his first bite. As he chewed slowly, the hunger seemed to dissolve all the shame and embarrassment he had felt moments before. Isabella watched him calmly, trying to process the strange emotions stirring within her. Compassion intertwined with something deeper, a connection she couldn't quite name. As Jep ate, the cafe returned to a state of forced normalcy. Marcel, still indignant about Isabella's intervention, had stepped away from the counter to speak in hushed tones with the staff, casting furtive glances at the two. Yet the atmosphere still carried a tension, as if something more was on the horizon. Then, as Isabella adjusted her bag on the table, something shimmered on Jep's wrist. She caught a glint of an old watch, and for a moment, she didn't think much of it. But soon, the shape and style drew her in, triggering distant memories. "Mr. J," she said, her tone shifting to curiosity, "may I ask about your watch?" Jep, a bit confused, stopped eating and looked at his wrist, as if surprised he was still wearing it. "Oh, of course," he replied, carefully unfastening the strap. "It's a keepsake from someone very important." As he handed her the watch, Isabella's fingers trembled at its cool texture. Turning it over, she examined the back and her heart raced. Engraved in delicate letters was a name that made her shudder. Emmanuel. She brought a hand to her mouth in shock. This watch, it was the same one she had given as a gift many years ago to someone who meant everything to her. It belonged to Emmanuel, the man she had loved and tragically lost. How had this watch come to Jep? "Where did you get this?" Isabella's voice trembled as she asked, her eyes fixed on the object as if it had reopened a wound she thought had healed. Jep, sensing the emotion in her gaze, was confused for a moment. "It was a gift," he replied hesitantly. "A gift from my son, Emmanuel." His words struck Isabella like a blow. Her suspicions were confirmed. Jep's son was the same Emmanuel she had loved deeply, the man whose death she still mourned. A mix of sadness, surprise, and longing flooded her chest. "Emmanuel, he passed away many years ago," Jep continued, his voice heavy with sorrow. "After he left, life was never the same." Isabella fought to hold back tears, the shock overwhelming her. Emmanuel had vanished from her life so abruptly, leaving her with no chance to say goodbye. And now here was his father, a man shattered by life's circumstances, holding the only object that connected her to her past. "He was my—" Isabella struggled to find the words, emotion choking her. Jep, noticing her distress, began to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. "You knew my son?" he asked, his voice a mix of surprise and pain. Isabella nodded, unable to speak. "I loved him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I loved him more than anything in this world." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken feelings. Jep appeared shocked, struggling to process her confession. Isabella held the watch tightly, as if fearing it could slip away from her again. "Why didn't I ever know about you?" Jep finally asked, his voice filled with curiosity and sorrow. Isabella took a deep breath, preparing to revisit her past. "It's a long story," she began, looking into the eyes of the man who was now more than just a stranger. "But I think we need to talk." Isabella cradled Emmanuel's watch as if it were fragile glass, every detail transporting her to a time she thought she had left behind. The worn shine, the discreet engraving, the way Emmanuel used to twist it on his wrist while they talked. It all rushed back, overwhelming her with emotions and memories. Jet watched her, his eyes glistening with a confusion that began to shift into understanding. "You recognize that look, the look of someone who had deeply loved his son and felt the same pain he had carried since Emmanuel's loss. The connection between them was undeniable." "He never mentioned you," Jep said, his voice hoarse and low. He seemed hesitant, unsure if he was ready for what Isabella might reveal, yet a part of him needed to know. Isabella sighed, still holding the watch. "I don't know where to begin," she said, her tone melancholic, her heart heavy with memories. "I met Emmanuel when we were young. I worked in a boutique, my first opportunity in the city. He used to come by with donations for the orphanage where I grew up, and that's how we became close." Jep's eyes widened. "Orphanage?" She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Yes, I was raised there since childhood. I never knew my parents, but the orphanage became my home. That's where I met Emmanuel. He was always kind, so full of life. We had many plans together, plans for the future, until fate intervened." Jep fell silent, absorbing her words. Isabella's pain mirrored his own, and as he listened, he realized there was a part of Emmanuel's life he had never known, a side of his son he lost before he could fully understand. His heart tightened with both longing and gratitude for finding someone who shared that love. I never knew about that part of his life, Jep murmured, lowering his head. After Emmanuel died, my wife Victoria always blamed someone. She said he distanced himself because of a woman, but she never shared the details. All I knew was that after his death, nothing was the same. Isabella shuddered at the mention of Victoria. She didn't need any explanations to know who Jep was talking about. Isabella vaguely recalled distant, tense encounters with the stern woman whose expectations felt unattainable and whose approval was always out of reach. Victoria never accepted me, she said, her voice trembling. She never thought I was good enough for her son, and that created a chasm between Emmanuel and his family. He was torn between us, trying to be the perfect son while also wanting to live his own life. It was a very difficult time. Jeb looked up, visibly moved. He hadn't realized how heavy the burden on his son had been. The conflict that pulled Emmanuel away from the family had always seemed one-sided to him, convinced as he was that the blame lay solely with the girl his son loved. But now, sitting across from Isabella, he saw that the suffering ran much deeper and was more complex than he had imagined. He never stopped visiting me, but it was rare, Jep said with a long, tired sigh. And then the accident happened. Isabella felt a knot tighten in her throat. The moment she had dreaded was approaching, the point where everything fell apart. Jep continued, his voice growing weaker. That day, it happened so fast. Emmanuel was with her, and I never knew exactly what happened. He was gone, and the only thing left was this watch. His gaze fixed on the accessory in Isabella's hands, as if it were the last tangible connection he had to his son. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. She had been there that day, the day of the accident, the day everything changed. The memory was an open wound that had never fully healed. I was with him, she confessed, finally breaking the silence. We were heading to a friend's house together, but we never arrived. There was an accident. It all happened so fast. When I woke up, he was already gone. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, and she covered her face with her hands, allowing herself to sink into the pain of that moment. Jep watched her, equally moved, tears silently streaming down the lines of his weary face. I never knew, Jep whispered, his voice breaking with pain and regret. I never knew you were with him. Isabella shook her head, struggling to control her emotions. I loved him with all my heart, she said, and I lost everything that day. She had tried to move on, but the past always lingered. While Jep had sunk deeper into sadness and regret, his life reduced to what she saw now, an old tired man trying to survive the ruins of his losses. I can't believe it, Jep murmured, shaking his head slowly. You were the woman he loved, and I never knew how much that meant to him. Isabella quickly wiped her tears, striving to maintain her composure. I didn't know he was your son until now, but seeing the watch brought it all back. He always wore this watch, the gift I gave him when we started making plans for the future. Jep seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes fixed on the past. He spoke little about you. He continued, almost in a whisper. But I knew something was pulling him away from us. Victoria, she never accepted the idea of Emmanuel being with someone not from our level. She always wanted him to marry someone from society, someone who could elevate our position. His voice trembled with guilt and sadness. Isabella nodded, understanding perfectly. She hated me. Whenever I tried to get close, I felt her disdain. Emmanuel was caught between two realities, trying to please everyone. He was a good man, Jep. He wanted to make everyone happy, but it tore him apart. Jep took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly on the table. I never imagined it would turn out this way. After he was gone, Victoria and I grew even further apart. She blamed herself and deep down. I think she blamed me too. That's when everything started to crumble. Isabella looked at Jep with deep empathy. How did you end up here? She asked softly, choosing her words carefully to avoid reopening old wounds. Jep let out a deep sigh, the weight of his story making his shoulders sag even further. After Emmanuel died, Victoria was never the same. She fell into grief, and I lost my footing too. Our marriage couldn't withstand it. The guilt and mourning drove us apart, and I distanced myself from everything we had. We had a comfortable life, but the emptiness he left was unbearable. Victoria always blamed me. Jep continued, his voice thick with emotion. She would say that if I had been firmer with Emmanuel, he would have chosen a different path, stayed away from you. In my weakness, I believed her for a long time. Hearing this, Isabella felt a heavy weight in her chest. It pained her to know that Victoria saw her as the reason for the family's collapse. Jep, she said gently, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes life takes us down paths we can't foresee or control. What happened was an accident, but the love Emmanuel had for you and for me, that love was real. None of this can be diminished by accusations. Jep looked at Isabella with tear-filled eyes, clearly touched by her words. I never thought I would meet you or discover who the woman my son truly loved was. This means so much to me. Isabella reached across the table, lightly touching Jep's hand. We both shared the same loss, and somehow that connects us. I don't know why fate brought us here today, but I believe it means something greater. They fell silent for a few moments, processing the revelations and emotions swirling between them. Emmanuel's watch lay in Isabella's hands, and she carefully returned it to Jep, who placed it back on his wrist with a solemn expression. This watch, Isabella said softly, is more than just an accessory. It's a symbol of the time we spent with him, of what we shared. As painful as it is, it reminds me that time continues to pass, and we need to find ways to move forward. Jep smiled sadly, understanding the weight of her words. I don't know how to move on, he admitted sincerely. After we lost everything, Victoria and I, we ended up on the streets. Now we're just surviving. Isabella felt a wave of empathy wash over her. Where is Victoria now? She asked, her heart tightening. She's waiting for me in a nearby square, Jep said, lowering his head. We have nowhere to go, and she's even more broken than I am. Isabella took a deep breath, sensing that something greater needed to be done. I want to see Victoria, she said firmly. I want to help both of you. I can't change the past, but I can try to improve the future. Her heart raced as she walked alongside Jep through the bustling streets of the city. The words they had exchanged in the cafe echoed in her mind. Here was the father of the man she had loved, now about to meet the woman who had always despised her. She knew this moment would be challenging, but something deep inside her told her it was the right step to take. Jep guided her in silence, his steps slow and weary, as if the weight of the years and hardships had drained him of all his energy. Isabella's eyes wandered through the city, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Reuniting with Victoria was something she had never imagined. The memory of Emmanuel's mother made her tremble, but she knew she had to face it. After a few minutes, they arrived at a small square tucked away between old buildings. It was a quiet, worn place where a few people sat on benches or strolled leisurely. Under the shade of a large tree sat Victoria, her presence a stark contrast to the proud woman Isabella remembered. Once immaculate, she now appeared frail and hunched, wrapped in a tattered coat, her gray hair loosely tied back. Her once bright eyes now stared blankly, holding a small bag beside her. Jep approached cautiously, as if he might disturb a sleeping beast. Isabella followed closely, her heart racing. When they got close enough, Victoria lifted her eyes, her expression weary, quickly shifting to surprise and concern upon seeing a stranger beside her husband. Jep, Victoria murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. Who is this woman? Jep hesitated, searching for the right words. Victoria, this is Isabella. She was important to Emmanuel. The name hung between them like a stone thrown into a still lake, creating ripples of tension. Victoria's eyes widened in recognition. Isabella, she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. You're the woman who took him from us, the cause of all our misery. The accusation hit hard, and Isabella felt its sting, but she took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. I understand how you feel, she said, her voice steady but gentle. I'm here to help. We can't change the past, but maybe we can find a way forward. Victoria shook her head, trembling hands clutching her bag tighter. You don't understand. I lost everything, my son's life. Nothing makes sense anymore. Isabella felt a tightness in her chest as she witnessed Victoria's raw pain. There was no denying the devastation this woman felt from Emmanuel's loss. Jep knelt beside Victoria, holding her hands gently. Dear, I know you've suffered. I have too. But we found Isabella today, and she's willing to help us. Perhaps it's time to stop running from the past. Victoria looked from Jep to Isabella, confusion and pain etched on her face. Why now? She asked, narrowing her eyes as if searching for hidden motives. Why would you show up to help us after everything? You owe us nothing. Isabella moved closer, kneeling beside Jep to meet Victoria's gaze. Her eyes were filled with compassion, her voice soft yet heavy with emotion. I loved Emmanuel. I know we've lost so much, but I'm here to do something he would have wanted. He taught me to forgive and care for others, and I believe he would want me to reach out to you. Victoria remained silent for a long moment, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead the only sound in the square. Isabella could see the internal struggle in Victoria's eyes, a battle between wounded pride and the desire to finally let go of the past. Finally, Victoria sighed, a long, weary breath that seemed to release years of accumulated tension. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Jep squeezed her hands gently. Just say you'll accept help, Victoria. We've lived this way for too long. Maybe it's time to change that. Tears filled Victoria's eyes, and for the first time, she allowed some of the rigidity in her body to soften. I don't know if I can trust again. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, Isabel replied with an encouraging smile. Let me try to help one step at a time. I have space in my home. You can stay with me until we find a better solution. Victoria looked at Jep, who gazed back with hope and tenderness. Finally, she nodded, letting the tears flow. I accept. Isabella smiled, and in that moment, something began to change. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, Isabella felt they were all moving toward healing. The first rays of morning light illuminated the small living room of Isabella's home, where Jep and Victoria had settled the night before. Both were still uncertain and cautious about the drastic change in their lives. Isabella's home was cozy and modern, with elegant furniture reflecting her prosperous life, a stark contrast to the harsh reality Jep and Victoria had faced on the streets. Sitting in an armchair beside a large window, Isabella watched the sunrise, cradling a hot cup of coffee in her hands, her thoughts a tangled mix of hope and uncertainty. The presence of Jep and Victoria in Isabella's home represented more than just an act of charity. It was an effort to heal old wounds, to forgive, and perhaps to find a path to peace. When Victoria appeared at the door, she hesitated, still grappling with the reality of being under Isabella's roof. The sight of that once proud and fierce woman, now so fragile, was jarring. Victoria's shoulders were hunched, weighed down by years of sorrow, and her tired eyes held a flicker of something new, perhaps a glimmer of hope. You're up early, Isabella said, offering a slight smile and gesturing to the sofa beside her. Would you like some coffee? Victoria paused, as if weighing the kindness offered to her. Finally, she sank slowly onto the sofa. Yes, I'd like some. Thank you. Isabella poured a cup and handed it to Victoria, who wrapped her hands around the warm mug, allowing its heat to soothe her cold fingers. The silence between them was thick but not hostile. I still can't believe I'm here, Victoria murmured, staring into her coffee. If someone had told me years ago that I would one day accept your help, I would have laughed. Isabella smiled knowingly. I understand. Honestly, I never imagined we'd find ourselves here together after everything that's happened. Victoria took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a difficult confession. I never looked at you favorably, Isabella. When Emmanuel first spoke of you, I knew you were different from what I envisioned for you. I always wanted the best for my son and thought that meant he should be with someone who could help him succeed. Isabella remained silent, allowing Victoria to share her thoughts at her own pace. But now I see how wrong I was, Victoria continued, her voice trembling. I lost my son, my life, and for so long, I blamed you for taking Emmanuel away from us, for being the reason for our misfortunes. The truth is, what happened was much larger than any of us. A knot tightened in Isabella's throat as she absorbed Victoria's confession. I never wanted to take him away from you, she said softly. I loved Emmanuel, and I know he loved you both too. His decision to distance himself wasn't easy for him. He wanted to please everyone. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. I was blinded by pain and pride for years. I fed that resentment, and it destroyed us. Not just me, but Jep too. When Emmanuel left, I lost my footing. Now, so many years later, I see that you weren't to blame. I just didn't know how to cope with the loss. Isabella felt her own tears welling up, the weight of Victoria's words piercing through the defenses she had built around her heart. We've all lost, Victoria. I lost the love of my life, and you lost your son. We both suffered, but neither of us came out unscathed. Quickly wiping her tears, Victoria struggled to maintain her dignity. I don't know how to thank you for helping us now, after everything I put you through. I don't want thanks, Isabella replied, her voice filled with compassion. What I want is for us to find some peace. Guilt and resentment have weighed us down for too long. It's time to let that go, if not for ourselves, then for Emmanuel. Victoria managed a small, timid smile, but it was genuine. He would be happy to see this, wouldn't he? Isabella nodded, her eyes misty. Yes, he would. At that moment, Jep entered the room, interrupting the delicate conversation, but bringing a different energy with him. He seemed more relaxed, as if the simple fact of having a roof over his head and a comfortable bed had renewed him. You two are here talking, he said, a light smile on his lips. I think that's a good sign. Victoria and Isabella exchanged glances and shared a soft laugh. Yes, Jep, we're talking, Isabella replied, waving him over. I think we're starting to put the past in its place. Jep sighed in relief and sat beside Victoria, gently taking her hand. I always knew that what we had wasn't living. After we lost everything, the pain swallowed us. But now, maybe we can have a second chance. Isabella looked at the couple with renewed hope. You have a place here for as long as you need, but I hope that, with time, we can find something more permanent for you. You deserve a fresh start. Victoria squeezed Jep's hand, a shy smile forming on her lips. Thank you, Isabella. Maybe this is our chance to finally let Emmanuel rest in peace. Time passed quickly after that morning of reconciliation, and Jep and Victoria began to adjust to their new life in Isabella's home. The atmosphere, once heavy with unspoken grievances, was now filled with a sense of peace they had long forgotten. Isabella dedicated herself to providing the best for them, offering not just a roof, but a new perspective on life. The transformation wasn't immediate, but gradually, the warmth and empathy in their new environment began to heal their deepest wounds. One afternoon, while Isabella was organizing papers in the living room, Jep entered slowly and sat beside her. His gaze seemed distant, yet there was a quiet determination in his eyes. Isabella, he began, I've been thinking a lot. I don't want you to feel like we're taking advantage of your generosity. I know Victoria and I have been living here for some time, and I'm immensely grateful for everything you've done for us. But I think it's time for us to start looking for something more permanent. Isabella regarded him with surprise and admiration. Jep, you're not taking advantage of anything. I'm helping because I want to, and I know it helps me move forward too. But I understand what you're saying. You want something of your own. Jep nodded slowly. Exactly. I think it's time for us to try to build something for ourselves again. Something simple that we can call home. Isabella smiled, touched by Jep's honesty and his desire to rebuild his life. I think that's wonderful, and you don't have to do it alone. I want to help, but in a different way. We can search for a place together, somewhere comfortable where you can start anew with dignity. Jep looked at her, visibly moved. I don't know how to thank you enough for all of this. After so long on the streets, I thought I'd never have a chance at a normal life again. You deserve this new opportunity, Isabella replied warmly. And so does Victoria. I'm so glad you're ready to take this next step. As they spoke, Victoria entered the room, curious about their conversation. Are you talking about leaving here? She asked, glancing from Jep to Isabella. Yes, Isabella said encouragingly. Jep mentioned that you're ready to look for a place of your own. I think it's an excellent idea. Are you ready for that? Victoria sighed, the idea feeling both daunting and liberating. I? I don't know, she admitted. I feel safe here, and after everything we've been through, the thought of going out again makes me nervous. Isabella stepped closer, gently holding Victoria's hands. I understand. No one is saying this has to happen immediately. We can take it at your pace. The important thing is that you know you will always have a home, wherever you are, and I will always be here to help. Victoria looked at Jep, who gazed at her with encouragement, as if assuring her they could finally move forward. She took a deep breath and slowly nodded. Maybe it's time to start over. But I want to do it knowing we're not alone. You will never be alone, Isabella assured her. This is a journey we will take together. In the days that followed, Isabella focused on helping the couple find a new home. They browsed real estate listings, visited different neighborhoods, and after a few weeks, discovered a small house, simple but welcoming. It was situated in a quiet area near a park, perfect for Jep and Victoria to stroll and begin anew. When the house was chosen, Isabella helped organize the move, ensuring everything was ready to welcome them. The first night in their new home was exciting. Despite their nerves, Jep and Victoria were thrilled to finally call it home. The cozy living room, with its simple furniture and soft light, symbolized a fresh start. As Isabella said goodbye to the couple in front of their new house, Jep embraced her warmly. You've given us something we can never repay, Isabella, the chance to be a family again. Isabella smiled, moved. You don't need to repay me. Just live this new life with love and gratitude in your hearts. That's more than enough. Victoria, who had previously hesitated to express her feelings, stepped forward and hugged Isabella tightly. I never thought I could forgive or move on, but now I see that forgiveness sets us free. I'm so grateful for this chance. We're all healing together, Isabella replied, looking at both of them with affection. And Emmanuel would be happy to see this. As Isabella stepped away, leaving Jep and Victoria on the threshold of their new home, she felt a lightness in her heart. The past had been painful, but they were finally finding a way to peace. Weeks passed since Jep and Victoria moved in, and the adjustment process was gradual. The couple began to establish a new routine. The simplicity of life in that small home brought a tranquility they hadn't felt in a long time. Their walks in the park, dinner table conversations, and small moments of shared silence were a balm for their souls. Isabella visited often, always attentive to ensure they lacked nothing. What began as short, formal visits transformed into long, relaxed gatherings filled with laughter and shared stories. Isabella had not only helped them find a physical home, but also an emotional one, a place where forgiveness and love could flourish. One sunny Sunday afternoon, Isabella decided to do something special. She invited Jep and Victoria over for the day, with a surprise planned to further strengthen their bond. When they arrived, they were greeted by Isabella's warm smile and the delightful aroma of a delicious lunch prepared with care. You've come on the perfect day, Isabella said, guiding them to the dining room. I have a surprise. Jep and Victoria exchanged curious glances, confident that whatever Isabella had in store would be meaningful. They sat at the table, admiring the beautiful arrangement of dishes and simple yet elegant decor. Before they could ask what the surprise was, the door to the living room opened, and a tall, smiling young man walked in. Isabella stood up, her eyes shining with pride. Jep, Victoria, I want you to meet Esteban, my son, she said, her voice filled with emotion. He just returned from university and is eager to meet you. Victoria's face lit up, and Jep's eyes sparkled with genuine joy. Esteban approached the table, extending his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said with a warm smile, shaking Jep's hand and giving a gentle hug to Victoria. You look a lot like your mother, Jep commented with a light laugh. It's clear she raised you well. Isabella watched the scene unfold with a heart full of gratitude. This was more than just a family gathering. It symbolized a new beginning, an expansion of the circle of love and forgiveness she had carefully nurtured. Esteban's presence represented the continuation of Emmanuel's legacy. Though he never had the chance to know their son, Jep and Victoria were now meeting Isabella's son, a part of her life that embodied hope for the future. During lunch, the conversations flowed easily. Jep and Victoria, who once carried the weight of years of pain and suffering, seemed rejuvenated. After the meal, Isabella suggested they move to the garden for coffee. Esteban, attentive and careful, helped Jep walk to the outdoor area while Victoria and Isabella chatted happily about the flowers lining the path. Sitting outside with the sun setting in the background, the atmosphere was one of pure serenity. I never thought I could have something like this again, Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence. The feeling of family, of belonging. I thought those things had died with Emmanuel. Isabella gently held her hand. We're rebuilding this together, Victoria. Now we have a new chance to create good memories and live more lightly. Jep, gazing at the horizon, spoke softly. You know, Emmanuel left us much more than we realized. Even in his absence, he continues to unite us. I feel that somehow he is here, present, seeing that we finally found peace. Esteban, listening attentively, leaned in and spoke with calm wisdom. I believe a person's legacy never completely disappears. Emmanuel was an important part of all your lives, but now you are all part of my story. I'm very happy about that. Victoria smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. This time, it wasn't one of sadness. You're very kind, Esteban. I think we're all connected by something greater. The rest of the afternoon was filled with deep conversations, laughter, and a palpable sense of reconciliation. As evening began to fall, Isabella took them back to their new home. Jep and Victoria said goodbye with warm hugs, promising this wouldn't be the last time they all gathered. As Isabella walked home with Esteban, she felt the cycle of pain and mourning finally closing. The past would always be part of their lives, but the future now seemed brighter than ever. After months of struggle, Isabella, Jep, Victoria, and Esteban had found the peace and love they had long sought. Each of them, marked by their past, learned to forgive and move forward, united by bonds deeper than blood. Isabella, who had carried the burden of losing Emmanuel, now felt gratitude and serenity. Jep and Victoria, once consumed by grief, rediscovered the joy of simple living and shared love. Esteban, with his youth and generosity, brought hope and continuity to their lives. In the end, they became a new family, reborn through forgiveness and unity. Together, they built a home filled with love and hope, ready to face the future with strength, knowing that while the past was painful, it no longer defined them. Love and forgiveness transformed them, allowing them to find a new beginning, full of light and possibilities.